CrewAI is a multi-agent framework, and AgentOps is an agent observability tool. CrewAI is one of the leaders in their space, as is AgentOps. For reference, here's a list showing the leading open source multi-agent frameworks ordered by GitHub stars as of October 2024. For the remainder of this video, we will demo how you can use CrewAI with AgentOps via two beginner-friendly examples. In demo number 1, we will show how to build a CrewAI project up from scratch so we get a solid understanding of how a CrewAI project works. In demo number 2, we will show how to build a CrewAI project using the CrewAI CLI. We'll be building a team of songwriting agents to help us write a hit song. If you want to code along step by step, you'll need to install two tools onto your machine, Docker Desktop and VSCode. Both of these tools are free and offer extremely easy to use installation processes with support for Mac, Windows, and Linux. I'll be using Mac in this video, but the general process of what we'll be doing will be the same for Windows or Linux. Let me now show you how I installed these two tools on my Mac so you get a feel for how easy it was for me. But if your experience is not as straightforward, please leave a comment so I'm aware, or I suggest you put detailed descriptions of the issues you're running into either Google or ChatGPT for help troubleshooting. Here's how to download and install Docker Desktop on Mac. Go to the official download page, download the appropriate version. For me, this is Apple Silicon. Open the downloaded DMG file and drag and drop the docker.app icon into your applications folder. I've already done this, so I'll click stop, but that's it. It's that easy. And here's how to download and install VS Code on Mac. Go to the official download page, download the appropriate version. For me, this is Apple Silicon. Unzip the downloaded zip file and drag the Visual Studio Code.app icon into your applications folder. I've already done this, so I'll click stop, but that's it. It's that easy. After installing VS Code, you'll need to do one last thing. Open VS Code and come over to the Extensions Marketplace on the side menu, and you'll need to install two extensions. The Docker extension. You can search for it in the search bar, and once you find it in the panel, you can click on it, and then you'll see these buttons right here. You can click to install it. Should only take one click. It's that simple. B, you'll need the Dev Containers extension. You should see some buttons right here. You can just click to install it. Super simple. And that should be all the setup you need. All right, here we go from scratch. CrewAI, AgentOps, let's do it. Here we have an empty folder somewhere on our computer that we're going to use as our starting point. First, we're going to set ourselves up with a very solid foundation to build this CrewAI application on top of. Or I should say, I find this foundation to be very solid, but let me know what you think in the comments. Let's start by adding the following folder and files to this empty project. At the root, let's create a folder called .devcontainer. Inside of this .devcontainer folder, let's create a file called devcontainer.json. And at the root of this project, let's also create a file called dockerfile.dev. Here is the content we will paste into the devcontainer.json file. You'll understand what the content of this file does shortly. And here is the content we'll paste into the dockerfile.dev. You'll understand what the content of this file does shortly as well. Alrighty, now that we have these files set up, we can launch our dev container. We won't go into detail, but when I say launch our dev container, what I mean is we will build a mini computer that will run on top of our actual computer. Inside of this mini computer, we'll play around with CrewAI, close or kill the mini computer when we're done, and then our base machine, aka our laptop or desktop or whatever we're using, will be left clean as if nothing ever happened. AKA, this is a fantastic technique for experimenting with new software without cluttering our base machine with potentially messy software installations. Here's how we build our dev container. In VS Code, we type Shift-Command-P, and that opens this menu called the command palette. Inside the command palette, we look for an option that says Dev Containers, Reopen in Container. I think this menu option will only be available if you have the dev containers VSCode extension installed. When we select it, our dev container will begin being built. In my experience, building a dev container takes about 1 to 3 minutes. It depends on a number of factors like how fast my machine is or the details of the dev container I'm building, etc. But after the dev container is, right, so that took like a minute, maybe even less. But after a dev container is built, we can shut it down, turn it on, shut it down, turn it on. Shutting it down and turning it on only takes a few seconds. Anyways, it might take longer for you. It might be shorter. I don't know the details of your environment, but hopefully that gives you a feel for how this works. Let's quickly test out this development container to make sure it's looking good. As CrewAI is a Python-based tool, let's confirm we have Python installed. And we do. And let's try running some Python code to make sure that works too. So here I've created a file called main.py. Let's add some code into this file and pass this main.py file to the Python interpreter on the dev container. And it looks like it works. If we look closer at the dockerfile.dev, we can see we asked Docker to build us a mini machine with Python 3.12 installed on it. And we also asked for some additional C++ libraries to be installed as well, because these will be needed by CrewAI. The remaining lines of this file outline where we want to work inside of this dev container. For example, if we enter the pwd command or present working directory on our dev container, we can see we are in a folder called code at the root of the file system. If we were to look at the root of the file system on our base machine, we would not see any folder by the name of code. The mental model to keep in mind is that we have two separate systems running on our machine. We have the dev container and we have our base machine. Each of these two systems has its own file system and is capable of having completely different software installed. Moving forward, we're going to be working inside of the code folder at the root of the file system of the development container, or our mini machine that's running on top of our base machine. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's remove this main.py file that we use for performing a quick hello world test and move along. Now that we have a solid foundation, we can start building our CrewAI project. The way we're going to do this is not recommended at all, but for the purposes of learning how CrewAI works, it will be fantastic. What we're going to do is build up a simple CrewAI project from scratch, one file at a time. Here on CrewAI's documentation, they provide an outline of what a CrewAI application looks like. We can see a CrewAI project contains a source folder. Inside of the source folder, we have another folder. Here it's called My Project. Inside of My Project folder, we have a main.py file, a crew.py file, a tools folder, a config folder. Inside of the config folder, we have an agents.yaml file and a task.yaml file. Okay, got it. So in the same way a chef can take a look at a recipe, get the gist of it, and improvise on it when cooking a dish, we are going to build an application that follows the general outline of what a CrewAI application looks like. Let's add the following folders and file to our dev container. At the root of our project, let's create a folder called source. Inside of this source folder, let's create a folder called our crew of agents. And inside of this our crew of agents folder, let's create a file called main.py. When a file ends in .py, it indicates to us that it will hold Python code. When you're looking at Python projects, it's very common to see some file called main.py. For our purposes, main.py will be the file we use to launch our agents and give them tasks. For the beginners watching, I find it important to tell you that when programming, we can call files, folders, and many other aspects of the code we write whatever we like. For example, we could have called main.py blah.py. Let me show you. Let's rename main.py to be called blah.py. And let's add a simple instruction into blah.py. For example, this is the instruction to print telling my agents to do something to the screen. And then let's pass this blah.py file to the Python interpreter. And then you can see we get the text printed telling my agents to do something. Names are just labels. And when programming, there are an infinite number of ways to organize your code. In practice, though, so it's easier to collaborate and build with others, we follow conventions. These conventions are learned through experience over time, so be patient if you're feeling unfamiliar with what you're looking at. Watch the whole video and come back to any confusing parts later. Let's rename this blah.py file back to main.py because that's more conventional, and quickly confirm that everything works. And let's pass the main.py file to the Python interpreter. And as we can see, everything works just the same. Now, instead of simply printing out the text, telling my agents to do something, let's add some code provided to us by the team at CrewAI. We could add all of the code of this product into a single file, aka this main.py file, but that is not advised, as over time that would mean we would constantly be scrolling up and down across the main.py file as we added more lines. Therefore, let's add another file to our project called crew.py. Let's add this crew.py file inside of the our crew of agents folder. And here is the content that we will paste into this crew.py file. And we can call the code in this crew.py file from the main.py file like so. Okay, remember this dockerfile.dev file and how it included this line that says Python path equals /code? This line configures the Python interpreter on the dev container to look for code we import at this specified path. For example, if we look at the path of the crew.py file, we can see the path is /code/source/our crew of agents /crew.py. I know, in the main.py file, paths are specified with dots in our imports instead of slashes, but in this context, it means the same thing. Also note that we don't have to write .py at the end of Python files we import in our code. Quick side note, so in my VS Code, I was seeing a warning that said select interpreter. The warning was showing right here. VS Code should automatically detect the interpreter path on the dev container, right? So hopefully you don't see this issue, but I've seen it happen from time to time. And if this is happening for you, this is how you fix it. In VS Code, type Shift-Command-P, that'll open up the command palette, and search for an option that says Python Select Interpreter. If you don't see this menu option, you can start typing Python. It'll start filtering out the menu options, then you can select this one, right? This is the appropriate one, Python Select Interpreter. Hit enter, and that'll take you to a submenu. As I mentioned, VS Code should automatically detect the interpreter path, right? Hopefully you see a recommended option. You can just select it, and that'll make the warning go away. If for some reason you don't see a recommended option in the submenu, you can manually enter the path to the interpreter on the dev container here, right? By selecting this option, enter interpreter path. The path to the interpreter is /user/local/bin/Python. Then you can click enter, and that should make the warning go away as well. If you recall, I guess 30, 60 seconds ago, crew was colored white, as was the our crew of agents symbol, right? And after I selected the interpreter path, everything became colored appropriately as I expected, etc. So, like I said, if everything's colored as you're seeing it, or everything's working smoothly, ignore this section. But if you have a warning showing somewhere in your VS Code UI that says, select interpreter path, I just showed you how to fix it. So let's move forward. Let's try running our crew of agents for the first time. Module not found error, no module named CrewAI. When we fed this main.py file to the Python interpreter, the code or the instructions outline began being executed from top to bottom. On line 1, you can see we're doing an import. We're importing source.ourcrewofagents.crew. That popped the Python interpreter over to the crew.py file. In this file, you can see on line 1, we're also doing an import. We're importing this thing called CrewAI. And you can see, as indicated by VS Code, has this yellow squiggly line underneath it. If we hover over, we see the text, import CrewAI could not be resolved. So, as indicated by the error in the console, and as indicated by VS Code, this CrewAI thing is nowhere to be found. So what we're going to do is add this CrewAI thing to our dev container, and hopefully this error will go away. Python has a system in its ecosystem called PyPy, which is short for Python Package Index, that allows us to easily download code published by other members of the Python community. If we enter this command to our terminal, code published to PyPy by the CrewAI team will be downloaded to our dev container in a way that the Python interpreter can access. If we omit the version number and just type pip install CrewAI, the latest version of the CrewAI package will be downloaded. But to not confuse things, especially for those following along, let's just download this version, which is the latest version as of the time of recording. It looked like the installation worked, and we can see that the warnings in VS Code went away. So let's now try running our crew again and see what happens. Okay, we see a different error, which is fantastic. That means we fixed the CrewAI import error. But now we're seeing an error that says file not found, no such file directory, code source, our crew of agents, config/agents.yaml. I wonder what this could mean. The way CrewAI is designed requires us to add this agents.yaml file at a very specific location. So let's add this file like so. Inside of the our crew of agents folder, let's create another folder called config. And inside of this config folder, let's add a file called agents.yaml. Let's paste this content into the agents.yaml file. As of the time of recording in October 2024, the content of this agents.yaml file has to follow a very specific structure. With no indentation, we put the name of each agent in our crew, and then at one level of indentation below the name, we specify the agent's role, goal, and backstory in natural language. There are other properties that we can specify for our agents, but these are the required ones. All the other ones are optional. FYI, this way of outlining configuration is extremely common in programming and is called YAML format. YAML allows you to specify key value pairs of information that can be nested at various levels. In the context of a YAML file, this angled bracket character is known as a folding block symbol. This character allows you to write the value associated with a key or property on multiple lines instead of one big, long line. The way we connect this agents.yaml config with the crew in our crew.py file is like so. We reference the relevant key so that it lines up with the method name that generates each agent. And let's do this for the other agent real quick as well. And that's it. And oops, we never imported the agent class from CrewAI. Let's do that. And now all of our warnings go away and we're looking good. Taking a step back, we can see that our crew class is coming together nicely. For the beginners watching, in the context of programming, a class is a blueprint for creating things. To use another cooking analogy, let's say that we have the recipe for a dish. The recipe is not the dish. It's the instructions for how to make the dish. Similarly, in programming, a class defines the ingredients or components of code. When we pass a class to the interpreter of a particular programming language, for example, the Python interpreter, we are left with runnable code that implements the blueprint defining the class. We can see in this class, we're defining a group of two agents, with one of them being George Washington and the other being Thomas Jefferson. Now that we've defined the details of our agents, let's try running our crew again. Okay, we see a different error, and that's fantastic. That means we fixed the error related to the missing agents.yaml file. But now we're seeing an error that says file not found, no such file or directory, code source, our crew of agents, config/tasks.yaml. I wonder what this could be. In addition to configuring our agents, the CrewAI framework requires us to specify a file called task.yaml that outlines the task we want the agents in our crew to perform. So let's create this task.yaml file at the exact location given to us by this last error. Inside of this file, let's paste the following content. As of the time of recording in October 2024, the content of this file has to follow a very specific structure. At no level of indentation, we specify the name of each task, and then at one level of indentation below the task, we specify its description, its expected output, and the agent we want to assign the task to. The way we let our crew class or blueprint know about the tasks outlined in this tasks.yaml file is like so. We come over to the crew.py file and add the following code. And we have to format this according to Python's rules. One sec. And that's looking good. We just have to import the task class from the CrewAI package, as well as the task decorator. If you've never seen a decorator before, this is a decorator. All a decorator is a fancy way of writing a function that takes a function as an input and returns another function. Don't stress out about it. Just look at this stuff from a high level. Zooming out, we can see we're designing our crew to consist of two agents who will work together to accomplish two tasks. By default, CrewAI executes the tasks outlined in the task.yaml file sequentially from top to bottom. So here we can see we're assigning Thomas Jefferson to write us a Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration of Independence he spits out will be fed into George Washington, who will then generate a military strategy for us. There are other patterns besides sequential execution when giving groups of agents tasks to accomplish your goals, but we'll leave those topics for another video as we're keeping this super simple and beginner friendly. All right, let's try running our crew again and see what happens. All right, well, we get a different error. So we fixed that missing task.yaml file error. That's great. And now we're getting an error that says something went wrong. Kickoff should return only one task output. So sometimes when you see errors, it's very straightforward, but other times it's not. So if we come to crew.py. Okay, so this should have been written like so. Excuse me. So yeah, I think that should work. And let's run our crew again and see what happens. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we have to define the tasks inside of our class, and we also have to link them with the crew object here. So hopefully that makes sense. And now we're getting a different error. This error says OpenAI exception, API key client option must be set, right? Authentication error. I wonder what this could be. This error is happening because we haven't authenticated our project with OpenAI's platform. CrewAI supports various LLMs for powering the agents in a crew, but by default, it uses OpenAI. If you're unfamiliar with the term LLM, an LLM is the part of an agent we would consider its brain. The details of how an LLM works can be explored outside of this video if interested. But for our purposes, we'll be calling an LLM powered by OpenAI via its API each time one of the agents in our crew is performing the task currently assigned to it. Connecting our project with OpenAI is simple. All we have to do is come to platform.openai.com in our browser. And if this is a new account for you, you will have to add a couple dollars. OpenAI's pricing model is usage-based. It's like a gas station. You will need some credits. And after you have that set up, you can browse around and look for the API keys section. API keys have been replaced by project API keys. View project API keys. So here we can create a new API key. So let's click this button and we can leave everything as default and click create secret key. And make sure you keep this private, but let's copy it and we'll be using it later. So make sure that no one else besides you gets access to this API key. And here is how we securely add this API key to our project. For the beginners watching, pay attention closely because this technique is very common. At the root of our project, we're going to create a .env file. Inside of this .env file, we will type on a single line in all caps, OpenAI _ API _ key equals, and then we will paste in the API key that we provisioned on OpenAI's platform. We'll save this. And the next thing we'll do is install this special package called python.env. This is the version that we'll be using. And then we'll come over to the main.py file and add these lines. These lines will read in any secrets that we have in the .env file and make them available to our code. So now if we run our crew, let's see what happens. Hopefully this should work. And yeah, things look like they're working. The console looks beautiful. And interesting. We only see George Washington performing a task. Let's see what's going on. Oh, I see what happened. So the decorator was accidentally deleted. So if we run our crew again, yep, now we see Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence. And when he's finished, George Washington will write us, or I guess he'll come up with a military strategy. Right? There goes the Declaration of Independence, and here is the military strategy. So that's fantastic. We have a working crew. Remember, the way we built up our crew of agents up from scratch manually is not recommended at all. But for the purpose of learning how CrewAI works, I hope you found it useful. Let's do one final thing before we wrap this up. Let's show how we can track our agents using a tool called AgentOps. AgentOps is compatible with many different multi-agent frameworks and allows us to track metrics such as the cost of the agents in our crew, how long it's taking the agents in our crew to complete its tasks, and it'll also track any errors our agents run into as well. The process of integrating AgentOps is extremely easy and is very similar to how we integrated with OpenAI. To integrate with AgentOps, come over to app.agentops.ai. If you haven't signed up already, create an account and come over to the API key section once you're logged into your dashboard. You should already have an API key provision for you by default, and copy this API key and come back to the CrewAI project that we've been building. And inside of the .m file or the .env file, let's add a new line, and in all caps, let's write AgentOps underscore API underscore key equals, and then paste in the API key that you copied from the AgentOps dashboard. Save. And then let's come over to the main.py file and let's add the following lines. Make sure you add these lines after the load.env command so that the AgentOps API key is available to be used. And make sure you add this AgentOps tracking code before you call your agents so that they're ready to be tracked before doing tasks. But hold up. Notice how VSCode is giving this little warning indicator telling us that there's something up with this AgentOps import. And we've seen this before. It's because we haven't installed this package yet. So let's type this pip command into our terminal. And after the installation completes, we should see this warning go away in VSCode, and it does. So now let's run our crew again and see what happens. And when our crew is done, we see some analytics, right? We see the cost, and we see this link that we can click on and inspect. We can see it gives us a dashboard with an overview of this session that we just had with our crew. And this can be very useful for troubleshooting issues and getting an overview of what's going on. As you leverage agentic workflows more and more, you're going to need a tool like AgentOps for monitoring what's going on. Okay, let's now wrap this up. So I'm going to move these two lines to the top of the file just to be a bit cleaner. And that looks good. And let's also record all of the PyPy packages that we use throughout the building process. So the conventional way of doing this is to create a file at the root called requirements.txt. And inside of this requirements.txt file, let's paste the following content to record the various PyPy packages we used as well as their versions. And now let's store a copy of this code on GitHub. Add a file called .gitignore. And inside of this .gitignore file, let's add this entry. Git is no longer tracking the .env file, which is great. That's what we want. Never expose your API keys. Let's create a repo on GitHub, then add a remote to our local Git configuration, and then push our code to GitHub. And when we take a look at our code in GitHub, we don't see the .env file. That's what we want. And we also need to upload all the tags because I've been tracking each step along the way. So we'll say git push -- tags. Fantastic. Then when we reload, yeah, fantastic. So you can easily follow along. So what we can do now is close our dev container and poof, it's like nothing ever happened. If you want to follow along, you only need two things installed on your computer: Docker Desktop and VS Code. Docker Desktop allows us to run these little mini computers on top of our actual computer, aka our laptop or desktop. And inside of these little mini computers called dev containers, we can experiment with new software. As you'll soon see, using dev containers for doing software development is a great way to stay organized. VS Code, on the other hand, is a code editor. Think of VS Code as Microsoft Word, but for viewing and editing code instead of documents. After installing VS Code, you'll also need to install two VS Code plugins or extensions, namely the Docker extension and the Dev Containers extension. Both Docker Desktop and VS Code are free and offer support for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Let me show you how I installed them onto my Mac so you get a feel for how easy it was for me. But if you run into issues, I suggest leaving a comment or pasting detailed descriptions of what you're running into either Google or ChatGPT. Here's how to download and install Docker Desktop on Mac. Go to the official download page, download the appropriate version. For me, this is Apple Silicon. Open the downloaded DMG file and drag and drop the docker.app icon into your applications folder. I've already done this, so I'll click stop, but that's it. It's that easy. And here's how to download and install VS Code on Mac. Go to the official download page, download the appropriate version. For me, this is Apple Silicon. Unzip the downloaded zip file and drag the Visual Studio Code.app icon into your applications folder. I've already done this, so I'll click stop, but that's it. It's that easy. After installing VS Code, you'll need to do one last thing. Open VS Code and come over to the Extensions Marketplace on the side menu, and you'll need to install two extensions. The Docker extension. You can search for it in the search bar, and once you find it in the panel, you can click on it, and then you'll see these buttons right here. You can click to install it. Should only take one click. It's that simple. B, you'll need the Dev Containers extension. You should see some buttons right here. You can just click to install it. Super simple. And that should be all the setup you need. Here we go from scratch, aka an empty project. This is the first set of files that we're going to add to this empty project. First, we're going to add a folder by the name of .devcontainer. Inside of this folder, we're going to place a file called devcontainer.json. And at the root of the project, we're also going to create a file called dockerfile.dev. These files are related to Docker and will configure a little mini machine or dev container that runs on top of our base machine. This is the content that we're going to use to populate these files. This is what we'll paste into the devcontainer.json file. Let me expand this. And here is the content we will paste into the dockerfile.dev. These files will make sense shortly. Now that we have these files added, let's build or launch our mini computer or dev container. Before we do that though, let's take a quick look at the Docker desktop UI, and we can notice there's no containers running. And let's also set up a timer so that we can time how long it takes to build this dev container. So if we come back to VSCode, here's how we launch the dev container. So we'll type Shift Command P. That'll open up this command palette, as it's so called. And you'll find an option in the menu called Dev Containers Reopen in Container. This menu option will only be available if you have the Dev Containers extension installed. We'll click Enter and quickly start the timer. And let's see how long it takes. Is that it? Took less than 10 seconds for me. But yeah, I would say on average, building a dev container usually takes about like 1 minute, maybe 3 minutes. It depends on the details of your machine and how much software you're packing into the dev container. The next thing to notice is in the Docker desktop UI. Remember before we had no containers showing, but now you can see we do have a container showing. Let's run a little smoke test on this dev container to make sure it behaves as we expect. So because CrewAI is a Python-based tool, let's make sure we have Python installed. And we do, Python 3.12. This aligns with line 1 of the dockerfile.dev. This is configuring the mini machine to come installed with Python 3.12. And let's make sure that we can execute Python code on this dev container. Let's create a little hello world script and see what happens when we pass it to the Python interpreter. And that works. Let's delete this main.py script because we won't need it moving forward. And the last little smoke test that we'll do is confirm the location that we're in on the dev container. And we can see that we're at the root of the file system in a folder called code. If we were to look at the root of the file system on our base machine, we would see no folder called code. The mental model to keep in mind is that we have two machines running on our computer. We have the dev container and we have the base machine. Both of these machines have independent file systems and are capable of having completely different software installed. Moving forward, we're going to be working in the dev container. And once we're done with this walkthrough, we're going to kill the dev container along with all the software that we install on it, and our base machine will be left clean. Now that we have a solid foundation, let's install Crew from the Python package index, aka PyPy. Let's type this command, pip install CrewAI equals 0.67.1. This is the latest version as of the time of recording. After installing the CrewAI package, we can use the CrewAI CLI like so. I don't know what's going on here, but here is the CrewAI CLI menu. And you can see the CrewAI CLI offers commands for doing training, for replaying sessions that you've had with your crew. And of particular note or importance to us, there is this create command for creating crews. So because we're going to be creating a acclaimed group of musicians to help us write a hit song, let's enter the following command. CrewAI create crew hit music only. Hit music only is the name of our project or crew. This is customizable. You can put whatever you want here. In the console, we can see all of these generated files and folders. And this is great because using the CLI saves us time from having to create all these files and folders manually ourselves. And also note how all these files and folders were created within this folder in our project. these files that were generated adhere to the guidelines of Python Poetry. Python Poetry is a popular Python framework that has gained a lot of traction over the past few years. The other thing to note is that if we dig a little deeper, we can see that we actually have a working crew called the Hit Music Only crew in this code. And at the moment, this crew consists of a researcher agent and a reporting analyst agent. Because all of these generated files were added in a subfolder of our project root and not the project root itself, we have a very minor technical tweak that we have to perform. And the way that we do this little tweak is by coming over to the devcontainer.json file and adjusting the workspace folder key. Here is the updated value that we will specify. We'll put the name of our generated CrewAI project. And because this is an update to the configuration of the dev container, we actually have to rebuild the dev container. As a reminder, the specs of the dev container are determined by the content we put inside of the devcontainer.json and dockerfile.dev files from step 1. There are a couple of ways that we can perform this rebuild, but for simplicity, we're going to do it like this. Let's come over to the Docker desktop UI, stop our dev container, and then delete it. We might have been able to just delete it right away, but anyways, I chose to shut it down first and then delete it. So here we are deleting it, right? So if we come back to VSCode, VSCode's like, what happened? Dev container is no longer here. You know, it's like an error, right? So anyways, let's cancel this and close VSCode. And the way we're going to reopen it is by opening the project folder, just like we would open any other coding project with VSCode. So I'll open it on the command line, but you can do this via the GUI as well. But I'm going to navigate to the project folder we've been working in, and then open this project folder with VS Code like so. And because we placed this devcontainer.json file in the appropriate location, VS Code picks up that we would like to open a dev container. And this is courtesy of the dev containers VS Code extension. So that pop-up went away, but there's a button on it you can click to trigger the rebuild of the dev container. But we can also trigger the rebuild by going to the command palette and selecting this option, dev containers reopen in container. So we'll select that. And we should be directly in the Poetry project, right? And that is the case. If we come to the terminal on the dev container and check out where we are on the file system, you can see we're no longer in the code folder, but we're in the code/hit music only folder. So the reason why we did this is because we want VS Code to play nicely with our Poetry project. If VS Code opens at the project root, our Poetry project is nested one folder down. So VS Code has a process when it launches where it tries to detect the type of project being opened. And now it can detect that our project is a Python Poetry project, and it'll give us some extra nice to have features that will enhance our developer experience. That's why we did this. But check this out. Let's open the CrewAI CLI menu again. But what happened? It's saying CrewAI command not found, but we installed it, right? So what happened was when we rebuilt the dev container, it lost some of its state, or it lost its state, I should say. So you can shut down and turn on and shut down and turn on a dev container, and that will preserve its state. But if you rebuild a dev container, it will lose its state. So now what we have to do is reinstall CrewAI. FYI, if we want to avoid reinstalling the CrewAI package each time we rebuild the dev container, we can edit the Docker file.dev, but let's not worry about that for now and move forward. Okay, we're back in the hit music only subfolder, right? So the present working directory is /code/hit music only. We're almost ready to run the crew, but we have to do one last thing before we do so. Because this code is based on the Python Poetry framework, we have to run the standard Poetry setup or install process. So let's time this just for reference. And the first command we got to type, or we got to enter rather, is this one. Then the second one is Poetry install. Let's see how long this takes. I think why this Poetry setup process took so long was because this generated CrewAI project comes with tools. And CrewAI seems to have many tools. I looked on their website and they have tools for connecting to databases, for scraping websites, for searching YouTube, etc. If you're not familiar with the term tools in the context of agent development, tools are the integrations made between our agents and the outside world. Now let's run our crew. And then it looks like the crew started to run, but then an error was thrown, and we can see here the error is related to a missing API key. And to be exact, a missing OpenAI API key. So believe it or not, we're actually in really good shape. So CrewAI by default uses OpenAI for powering the agents in a crew. CrewAI supports other LLMs as well, but like I said, by default, it uses OpenAI. Before we add our OpenAI API key to the project and fix this error though, let's recap what's happened up till this point. First, we started from scratch, aka an empty folder. We then set up a dev container, which is like a little mini computer that runs on top of our laptop or desktop or whatever we're using. Then we installed the CrewAI package from PyPy in order to use the CrewAI CLI. Then we generated a CrewAI project called Hit Music Only. Then we noticed how the generated project was placed into a subfolder. And because we wanted our VSCode editor to play well with this generated poetry-based project, we had to adjust the configuration of our dev container to open the generated subfolder when launching. So we edited the devcontainer.json config and rebuilt our dev container. After the new dev container finished launching, we were placed directly into the generated poetry project, which allowed VSCode to give us some extra nice to have development features like import inspection and syntax highlighting. Then, because our dev container lost its state after being killed, we had to reinstall the CrewAI package. We then ran the standard poetry setup process, aka pip install poetry followed by poetry install, and after the poetry setup process completed, we ran our CrewAI project and successfully launched our default crew of agents before they errored out due to missing access credentials when trying to connect to OpenAI. I hope this makes sense. Let's now move forward by adding an OpenAI API key to our project. Connecting a CrewAI project with OpenAI is simple. All we have to do is come over to platform.openai.com and sign up. If this is a new account for you, you will need to add some credits to your account. OpenAI's system is usage-based. It's like a gas station. So you will need some credits to use it. You can always add more later, so I recommend adding the minimum amount. And after you have that set up, look for the section that reads API keys. I found it in the dashboard section, right on the sidebar. There's this API keys option, and we can click this button here to open up a little modal for configuring some aspects of this API key. Let's just leave it default, then click create secret key. And then we'll be given an API key that we can use to connect our CrewAI project with the OpenAI platform. The way we add it to our project is like so. Inside of the poetry project, at the root, there is this .env file. let's make sure that this file includes a line that reads in all caps, OpenAI _ API _ key equals. Then we will paste in the value that we copied from OpenAI. After we have that set up, let's run our crew again, and hopefully everything works. So we'll type CrewAI run. And there goes the researcher. And this is the output generated by the researcher. And that output got fed into the analyst. And this is the final report generated by the analyst. So, we were able to run our crew successfully. So that's great. Let's now customize our crew by replacing the default agents and the default tasks that were given to us when we generated the project. We can do that by coming over to the source, hit music only, or whatever your project's name is, config folder. And inside of the config folder, we should see a file called agents.yaml. You can see by default, we were given a researcher agent and a reporting analyst agent. Let's replace these agents with the following agents: a songwriter agent and a producer agent. You can see for each of these agents, we're outlining its role, goal, and backstory in natural language. And there are other properties that we can supply, but if you want to learn about those, go to CrewAI's documentation. Let's now update the tasks that will be assigned to our agents by coming over to the tasks.yaml file. And you can see this is the list of tasks that was provided to us by the CrewAI CLI. Here we have a research task followed by a reporting task. By default, CrewAI will execute the tasks listed in this task.yaml file sequentially from top to bottom. So let's replace this content with these tasks. Here you can see we're first going to assign a songwriting task to the songwriter agent. And after the output is generated by this songwriter, we will pass it and have a producing task executed by the producer. So what we're doing here is having a songwriter write lyrics and beautiful melodies, and those raw ideas are getting passed to a producer who will compose it into a full song. After saving these updates to our crew's config, we have to link it with the crew class in the crew.py file. So let's come over to the crew class and make the following updates. Our researcher agent has now become a songwriter. And the reporting analyst agent has now become a producer. And let's also update the tasks that we're assigning to them. And the producer is also going to output a file so we can check out the final result, the final song. And let's update the name of this file that it'll spit out the results to be called song.md. So zooming out, what we've done here is create a internationally acclaimed songwriting duo and task them with writing us a #1 hit song. And we're almost ready to run this crew and have a hit on our hands. But before we do that, let's do one more thing. That being adding in AgentOps. So that in addition to having our song written to a file on our local computer, we have a backup in the cloud, as well as, can see some metrics about how this crew generated the song. Here's how easy it is to add AgentOps for monitoring our crew. First, come over to app.agentops.ai and sign up if you haven't already. They do have a free tier, and that should be enough for what we're doing here. And after you're signed up, come over to the API keys section, and you should see a default API key that you can copy. And the way that we add this API key to our project is by coming over to the .env file at the root of the poetry project, and on a new line, let's add a entry that reads in all caps, AgentOps _ API _ key equals. Then we'll paste in the API key that we copied from the AgentOps dashboard. After we have that set up, let's come over to the main.py file and add a few lines. These are the lines that we're going to add. Make sure to add them at the top of the file so that by the time you run your crew, tracking is set up by AgentOps. But observe how VSCode is telling us there's an issue with this AgentOps import. And we can read the warning that says import AgentOps could not be resolved. This is because we haven't yet installed the AgentOps package from PyPy. So let's do that now by entering this command. I should say before we enter this, that because this project is a poetry project, we have to use the poetry add command. If this was a plain old Python project, we would type something or enter something along the lines of pip install AgentOps, right? But because this is a poetry project, we have to use the poetry add command. So let's enter this and see what happens. Okay, that looks good. It looked like it worked. And notice that even though we installed the AgentOps package with the poetry add command correctly, we still have this warning. This is because by default, VS Code does not know where poetry installs packages. And we can easily fix this minor issue like so. First, we have to find out the location where poetry is installing packages. And we can do that by typing or entering poetry env info. And you can see this path is where packages are being installed by poetry. So let's copy this path value. And once we have it copied, we'll enter the following keystrokes into VS Code, Shift Command P to open up the command palette. And let's look for an option that reads Python Select Interpreter. Let's select this option, and then you'll see a recommended option. I think this might work, but just to make sure it's the same exact one that we just copied, there's also an option that says Enter Interpreter Path. So we can select that, paste in the path value that we just copied, click Enter, and that should fix the import error, and it does. In summary, we're using one tool, aka pip, for installing the CrewAI CLI, and we're using another tool, aka poetry, for adding packages to the project generated by the CrewAI CLI. I know it's confusing, but welcome to Python development. Finally, let's run this crew and generate a hit song. To review everything we've done up till this point, the agents.yaml file looks great. The tasks.yaml file looks great. The crew.py class looks great. And the main.py file looks great as well. But notice this. This wouldn't affect us if we ran it now, but we like to be clean. So CrewAI allows you to pass in values dynamically when running or kicking off your crew. So if we wanted to use this feature, we would use it like so. Let's say, for example, we wanted to customize the genre that our hit-making duo is specialized in. So we could put curly braces and then specify some variable like this, right? And we would also put this template variable over here. And we would pass in a dictionary that includes the value we would like to replace that template variable with. For example, hip hop, right? Maybe country, pop. You get the point, but we're not going to use this feature for now. We're going to keep it simple. You can explore the more advanced features offered by CrewAI outside of this video. And let's delete all this inputs stuff. We're not going to do any training, but let's just delete that, right? Let's delete these template variables from the agents.yaml file. And now Let's cook up this #1 hit by entering the CrewAI run command. Okay, AgentOps looks like it's tracking our crew, and we can see that our songwriter is writing a song about total accountability. And here are the lyrics generated by the songwriter. And these lyrics are then going to be passed to the music producer, who will, compose a song around them. And that'll leave us with our #1 hit. This looks very usable. And we have a copy of this hit in this song.md file for reference. And if we click on this link provided by AgentOps, we can see we also have a copy of this hit recorded to the AgentOps console. And we get some additional metrics too. For example, we can see that the songwriter went first in this session, and after the songwriter was finished, producer got to work. Here we can see the cost of generating this song, and yeah, this is fantastic. So now let's actually make this song and see what it sounds like. In the mirror, I see the truth. Every scar, every bruise. All the choices that I've made, they shape the man that I've become. Come on. No more running, no more games. Standing tall, I'll take the blame. No more running, no more games. Standing tall, I'll take the blame. I'm gonna own it, own my past. Every moment, every blast. Through the storm, I'll stand so proud. Accountability, shout it loud. I'll take the weight, I'll bear the cost. In this life, I'm never lost. Total freedom, it starts within when you own it. Okay, so I did adapt the raw output. Let's take a look at the original version of the song. So I did use the name, or I guess I will use the name. I like the name, right? Own it. I did use the same recommended BPM, beats per minute. That's like the tempo of the song, how fast it is. This chord progression I did use. And the chorus, I switched it up a little bit. So I adapted what was spit out here. So here it had 4 chords, and what I did was similar, but I did something a little different. And I did use, for the most part, the lyrics provided for the verse. The melody, to me, didn't make much sense. I didn't like the way it fit with the chords. So I just came up with a melody that sounded good to me. And I didn't use these. And I did use the lyrics for the chorus. I did adapt them a bit. But yeah, these melodies that were suggested for each line of the chorus, I did not use those either. And I only did the first verse and one of the choruses. To do the whole song would be a little bit, a little bit much, I think. Let's wrap this video up by doing one final thing. Let's copy this adapted version of the output generated by our crew and send it to a service called Suno. Suno allows you to put in a prompt and it'll generate a song for you. And you can see Suno generated 2 songs, and let's see what the first one sounds like.
Wake up in the morning light. fight, gotta get it right. Mirror shows a face unknown, not afraid to fight. Dreams are calling out my name, I won't be the same. Stepping out to start my day, no time for any shame. Running through these city streets, rhythm in my feet. Voices whispering my name, making me complete.